Hello, welcome back to the OSMcast, your podcast for everything awesome. I am John, and since I'm hosting, that means it's a very good probability that what you're listening to right now is another one of our awesome interviews, and this is no exception. Today's guest, I am really excited for. She has an incredible story. There's a lot of things I want to get into here that are just really great, and I think that anybody who's listening to this will relate to this. It's somebody that I've been rooting for from afar for a long time. Kara Buckland. Kara, thank you so much for making the time.
Hey, John, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Like I said, there's a lot I want to get into, but I'll start the way I usually do. What are some things you've been working on that you can share with us?
So the biggest thing, obviously, is that the first 12 episodes of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Stone Ocean just came out on Netflix, and I play the lead role of Jolene Cujo, which is kind of like a role I've been wanting for 8 years, not gonna lie. So that is kind of like the biggest thing that I am just so completely obsessed with right now.
It's so awesome that you were able to land that role. Sometimes things just work out, and I'm glad this is one of those times.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and just, hit the rewind button a little bit. What was it that first made you take an interest in acting?
It was honestly just when I got into watching anime and playing video games, which I know probably sounds like a very nerdy answer because if you talk to other actors, they're like, oh, well, I always knew that I wanted to be an actor and I did like theater and all this kind of stuff. And that wasn't really like my path personally. So, I kind of knew specifically that I wanted to do voice acting. And one of the games that kind of got me inspired to do voice acting was Soul Calibur 2. So then when I ended up being cast in Soul Calibur 6 years down the line, that was really special. And similarly, one of the anime that really inspired me to voice act early on was Inuyasha. So getting to play literally one of Sesshomaru's daughters was also kind of a dream come true.
That's incredible. Anytime that you hear a story about like just somebody wanted to do something ever since they were a kid and they put in the work and they did it, that's always a great story. But your story starts out even more incredibly than most of those stories do, because your journey to LA did not even start in the contiguous United States. It started in Alaska.
Right. And I think it's interesting how things have really changed over the time of the pandemic with the remote recording and stuff, because now there's a lot of people who are kind of able to book in things like anime and certain video games from wherever they are, even if maybe they don't have as many opportunities as people who live in LA or Dallas. But when I was first trying to start on this as a career, it's like you had to move to one of those places if you wanted to work in anime. Like there was no exceptions. Like if you moved away, you would be recast kind of thing. So it's cool that now it's opened up so much more, but I know it was really hard, honestly, to move to LA because it's very expensive and there's just like a lot of stuff that you have to deal with.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Just the amount of courage it takes for anybody to just, root up from home where they've lived all their lives and go to someplace they know nothing about. Like you said, it's very expensive to live in LA, and you don't know that things are going to work out. Acting is a very competitive field. You get a lot of rejection. So like there's absolutely no guarantee, no matter how confident in your abilities you are, that things are going to work out the way you hope, but you did it anyway.
Yeah, but I also tell people that it's like it is something that takes time. So when I first moved out, I had day jobs for the first 7 years that I lived out here. Like, I think a lot of people kind of have this idea that, oh, if I just move to where the work is, then I can just be an actor and that's that. And it's like, no, because it takes a really long time to get it's more about the consistency of work. It's less about, oh, can I book a lead? Oh, can I book this big thing? And it's more about how often can I work? So
Right.
even if, for example, you're just playing background characters in a lot of things, if you're continually called in every week by different companies to work on doing all these background characters, like you can totally make a living. Whereas maybe if you have a lead but that's the only thing you're working on, it's going to be a lot harder.
You're right. Man, that would scare me to death.
Yeah, I mean, I'd come out and visited different times, so it wasn't like super overwhelming to me. I think it was more the cost than anything that's, kind of intimidating, but
Right.
I do miss home. There a lot of times when all this remote recording stuff started, I'm like, can I just like move back? But I still work with certain clients and companies that want you to come into the studio. So it's still, I would say it's a lot less necessary to live here now, but it is still important and helpful, especially because there are always going to be clients that prefer you to come in.
Right. So, you mentioned getting the role of Jolene in the latest season of JoJo's, wanting to do this role for 8 years. Tell us a little bit about how you got into the JoJo's franchise and what it was about Jolene that resonated with you so much.
So I first got introduced to JoJo's in I believe 2013, and it was because some friends I had at the time were like, "Hey, you should check out this anime." And at the time, I don't want to say I'd fallen out of love with anime, but I was definitely less passionate about it because I wasn't so into like kind of like the slice of life stuff anymore and all that kind of stuff. And I really wanted things with, maybe like weirder or darker themes, I guess you could say, with the risk of sounding like super edgy or whatever. But so they're like, "Oh no, it's like it's this really cool anime and it's got like these like cool fights and all this kind of stuff." And I was like, "Oh, isn't it like these muscular men beating each other up? Like I don't even know if that would be my thing either." But I gave it a shot because why not? And then I was like, "Okay, part one's pretty cool." And then we watched part two and I was like, "Okay, I like this. It's got this charm to it." And then I was like, "Oh, well, what about part three?" And they're like, "Oh, that hasn't been animated yet. You got to read the manga." So, I started with then like reading from there and stuff, and I just like with each part kind of fell more in love, and they're like, yeah, eventually there's like a female Joestar, and I like as soon as I read part 6 I decided to cosplay her, and I got like the Joestar birthmark tattoo and all this kind of stuff. And at the time I felt like I would never get cast for Jolene one day because I was playing a lot of characters that were like teenagers and had higher voices and stuff like that. And, it's like now because I'm in my 30s, I think my voice has changed a little and I am playing like more kind of like badass characters, I guess you could say. But at the time I wasn't. So I was like, oh man, I I feel like I want to do it, but I wouldn't be good at it. And then over the years, I was just like, no, I have to do this.
So you get the call, you've landed the role. What's going through your mind at that point?
I mean, I couldn't believe it. Like, on one hand, I want to be like, of course, like this is what I wanted my entire career practically, but it was so scary to send off that audition because I was just kind of like, well, what if I don't get it? Because it's kind of like that's that. Like once you send that audition, it's kind of like up to fate almost at that point. Like,
Right.
okay, well, are they gonna pick me or are they gonna pick somebody else? And I had no idea. I still have no idea how many other people I was up against or, what the circumstances were like or whatever. So all I could really do was just be like, okay, this is my shot and I gotta do it. I gotta give it my best and not hold back. And so when I got the email, I was like really scared because when I saw like the notification come up in my email, I was like, okay, well, I mean, usually it's good news because it's kind of like if you don't hear anything back after you send an audition, it just means like you didn't book it because that's how it normally is. Like we
Right.
audition for a ton of things and we only book a small handful. So, usually if you hear something back, it's good. But, I was like, oh, what if they're emailing me to tell me that like, hey, we know you really want this, but we decided to go with somebody else and just wanted to give you the courtesy of letting you know because, we know you're probably agonizing over it. But no, it was just, confirming like, hey, so the schedule's going to be crazy. Are you good with that? And I'm like, I will do whatever it takes.
That is the proper response. So when you go in there and record for the first time, were you nervous?
Yes. Normally I would say with most of the jobs that I do, I'm not really, I think maybe sometimes we can get a little anxious if, like, hey, I'm working with this new director, new studio that I haven't worked with before. Hey, I'm working on this really big title and I want to make sure that I do a good job. But, I would say normally I don't really get nervous in the sense that it's like I've been doing this so long that I feel generally pretty confident in my work. But when it comes to something like this, I was so nervous because it's like, I have to do this justice. Like, this is the biggest role of my entire life, and I need to like, I have to bring it, you know? And the Japanese voice acting is just so good that I, you know, the bar is set really high, is what I always say. So it's like, and I heard her voice a little already because the trailer had come out and stuff. And, you know, I checked out a little bit of her other works just to kind of like get an idea of how to match her voice print and stuff. Just because when the Jolene audition eventually came up, I knew I wanted to be ready. But, you know, it was like, yeah, it's really like scary because it's kind of like, okay, you get the thing that you wanted for so long, but you have to do a good job. You have to, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I have not. I'll admit I've not gotten to around to watching it yet, but I am positive that you absolutely killed it. I have no doubt about that.
Well, thank you. You know, it can be hard sometimes too, because obviously in dubbing, you are restricted to the timing of the animation. So, you know, sometimes it can be like trial and error. Like you do a scream that's really good. And it's like, oh, it's a little too long or it's a little too short or something like that. And so, you know, there's a lot of technicalities that still come with it. So I think a lot of people, when they critique an English dub performance, they, you know, they kind of imagine that the actors in a way are working with no restraints. And it's like, no, when you have to match exact timing, there's a lot of multitasking. There's a lot of things you have to keep in mind.
Right. So we've talked about some of the incredible obstacles that you have overcome, you know, just throughout your journey here. Who would you say has had the biggest impact on your career?
Um, I mean, that's kind of like hard to answer in terms of like one person or another, because I feel like there's a lot of different people that kind of influence us. You know, it's like there's definitely, oh, well, I can thank this person for giving me my first shot in the industry, or you know, I can thank this person for giving me like a role that really helped kind of like kick off my career more, or like this friend who I was inspired by and learned from or whatever. So it's kind of like a combination of, I guess, everybody around me, as strange as that may sound.
No, I think that's a totally fair answer. I just kind of like to answer that question because every once in a while you get an interesting story about, you know, a teacher, somebody that did something crazy. So, you know, that's a totally fair answer though. Like, of course, yeah, it's seldom, you know, like one person, one big thing that changes your entire life. It's usually, you know, a product of your own work and what's going on around you.
Hmm.
In terms of acting, what's the biggest challenge for you?
Oh, I guess, well, because there can be different things, you know, like obviously if you're playing a character that does a lot of like yelling and screaming and stuff, it can be very like vocally stressful, and keeping up that stamina can be hard. With dubbing, which is the grand majority of the work that I do, you know, there is the challenge of you have to make everything fit exactly what the mouth is doing and what the animation is doing. And so sometimes maybe your performance can't quite be like how you instinctually would want to read the line, because it's like, hey, there's like they pause in the middle of the line and we have to cover that, you know. So it's you know, there's like that challenge in terms of multitasking. I think something that can be kind of difficult for everybody is just maintaining authenticity in the characters that they play, because even if you are playing a character who's very like over the top, if you're doing like a, you know, a crazy voice or something like that, it has to be grounded in something. Like it has to you know, the character, it needs to feel like real what they're saying. It needs to be believable. So it needs to not sound like a person performing the lines or reading a script. It needs to sound like, no, this character is kind of living their truth or what have you.
Yeah, there are so many interesting facets, including like some of the physical elements of acting, like you mentioned. I just always find it really interesting to see, you know, what people excel at, what they struggle with, because you know everybody's got different talents.
Yeah, I know like some people struggle with vocal range, for example, but I feel like vocal range was kind of like one of the first things that I personally worked on. So I feel like pretty confident that I can play like all sorts of character types and voices and what have you. But you know, something that I kind of struggled with too was, for example, because I do so much anime, and anime kind of tends to favor like certain reads, like they're bigger, more projected, you know, that kind of stuff. And so one thing I'd really like to do is work on like cinematic, like Western style video games. And for performances, they want like more like cinematic acting. They want it to sound more like a film or something a lot of times. So I did have to work on that, and I struggled with that because I'm so used to doing like the big character reads, if that makes sense.
Right. As we touched on before, acting, there's a lot of rejection. There's a lot of just, you send out an audition that goes out into the void. You never hear anything about it ever again. How do you stay motivated?
I think a lot of it is just like you kind of reframe how you think about it. So I don't really think of it, if I don't get booked for a role I auditioned for, I don't think of that as rejection. I just think of that as like business as normal, because the way that I frame it to other actors when they feel discouraged by this is, imagine that you're a casting director and you get 100 auditions for a given part. And obviously, you can only choose one person to play that character. And sometimes they get even more. Sometimes you get like 1,000 auditions, right? But so let's say you have 100 and you listen to those auditions and you kind of narrow down your choices. And what's going to happen is maybe you get down to like 5 or 10 people who are like, these like 5 people are all really good. And, then it maybe comes down to like, okay, I just like this little vocal nuance a little better, or this person did something in the read that I thought was interesting for the character, or this person's voice plays better with the person we know we want to play the other lead. And so they're going to sound good together. It comes down to like so many little factors at the end, but it's like that one person getting cast does not mean that the other 99 actors were terrible. It
Right.
doesn't mean they're bad actors. It doesn't mean they weren't right for the part. Like a lot of times it's really hard, there might be a lot of valid choices, and sometimes it comes down to the client and they're like, "Oh, I like this person's voice better," or whatever. So, I think just kind of like try not to focus too much on, oh, did I book this or did I not book this? Like they say, like you send it and forget it. And I know that probably sounds silly because then we're here talking about JoJo and how like I wanted this specific role for 8 years. But that's kind of like the exception, I would say in general. I really try to just not get too attached to anything I read for, because the odds are that we're not going to book it. It's like if you book one in every like 50 things you read for, like that's still considered a pretty good booking ratio. So it
Right.
kind of, you just kind of, you have to just sort of assume that you're not, like you try your best, you send it off, you assume I'm probably not going to book this, but if I do, it'll be a nice surprise. And then if you do get that email, you're like, oh, okay, cool. That thing I read for a while ago, they want to cast me for it.
That's I feel like that's a healthy perspective to have, and I feel like, that's just essential to having any kind of success, and so many things, but definitely something as competitive as acting. We alluded to it a little bit earlier, but tell us about some of your other interests outside of acting.
So I really like Pokemon Go. I still play Pokemon Go, and it's also kind of a great excuse to get out and do like physical activity and stuff. Because I used to work out at the gym and stuff, and then when the pandemic happened, I sort of had to kind of like find another way to exercise and stuff. So, I mean, I still do like the raid hours every Wednesday night, and I try to like not schedule my bookings for Wednesday night if possible because I want to do my raid hour, and I really like classic rock. A lot of my music taste was inspired by JoJo. I do cosplay. Like I haven't really done cosplay in a while because conventions only just started up again
Right.
recently. So I kind of like fell out of doing stuff there. But like costume makeup stuff, and I guess like video games when I have the time.
Yeah, I did see that photo you posted to Twitter after you announced you had the role, where you had like your hair and makeup just on point for the occasion.
Oh yeah, that was from like 2015 or
Oh
2016, and I had like
wow,
a,
wow,
yeah, I like made that Jolene costume, but
wow,
I've actually done like so many different variations of Jolene.
that's fantastic. I know you're at least back in the day you were a big FGC player. What are you still playing these days?
I don't really have like the time to dedicate to it, sadly. I did it's funny because at the beginning of the pandemic I was like, "Oh, I'm going to have all this time." So I went on Etsy and I ordered this custom like arcade cabinet basically that you can put a PS4 inside of it, and I was like really excited about it, and then, some delays happened. It took a while to come, but like then our industry ended up being ridiculously busy, and like to where like I've worked more in these past 2 years than I ever have in the rest of my career. So I didn't really have as much time to put into it as I wanted to, sadly.
One of those sad casualties from chasing a dream, I suppose. But I have to imagine it's worth it in the end.
Oh yeah, totally. But I'm just like, oh man, I wish that, I could I don't know, I wish we got like a really cool JoJo fighting game. I feel like we're overdue for a JoJo
Eh,
game.
Yeah, at least maybe bring back the old Capcom one. Throw in some rollback netcode. I think we'd be down for that.
Yeah.
Well, Kira, I'm gonna let you go with that. But thank you so much. This has been wonderful.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to yet another production of the OSMcast, your podcast for everything awesome. You can find us online at awesomecast.com, OSMcast.com, or, wherever you find your podcasts, just search for OSMcast. You can also find us on the social medias, OSMcast at Twitter or on Facebook. Of course, you can also find our wonderful interview guru, the greatest living interviewer, John Robbins, at J5 is Live. Or perhaps you'd like to follow our amazing editor, Anna, at Angel Darkfire, or just me, at It's Basil Time on Twitter. Our theme song is produced by DJ Inabito, and you can find him online at djinabito.com. And once again, thanks for listening to the OSMcast. We appreciate you.